The arrival in a hidden village. The journey to Igboeda had been long and grueling, the road winding through dense forests and rugged hills. For hours, the NYSC corps members, Ada, Kemi, Chuka, Busy, and David, sat in a rickety bus, bouncing over potholes as they ventured deeper into the unknown. Their assignment had been a shock. Most of them had hoped for a comfortable posting in a town or city, but instead, they had been sent to a village so remote that Google Maps couldn't even find it. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers, and towering trees loomed on either side of the narrow road, their branches forming an archway that swallowed the daylight. When the bus finally lurched to a stop at the village square, the corps members stepped out with stiff limbs, stretching their aching muscles. A crowd of villagers had gathered to welcome them. Their faces were a mix of curiosity and excitement, their dark eyes gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Women in vibrant wrappers balanced baskets of food on their heads, while children peeked shyly from behind their mothers' legs. The elders stood in the front, their expressions unreadable. A tall man, draped in flowing white robes, stepped forward. His face was weathered but strong, his beard streaked with silver. Oba Anezi, the village chief. "You are welcome to Igboeda," he said, his voice deep and measured. "You are a guest, and this village is now your home. But listen well, this is a land of rules. Respect them, and you will live in peace." The corps members exchanged glances. Rules. That was normal. Every village had its traditions. They smiled politely as the villagers offered them gifts, fresh yams, plantains, cloth, and even a live chicken that flapped its wings in Ada's arms. It was a warm welcome, almost overwhelming, but something in the air felt off. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the chief's expression darkened. He raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. "But there is one thing you must never do," he said, his gaze sweeping over them. "Do not enter the Whispering Woods. It is forbidden." A hush fell over the village. The wind whispered through the trees, and for a brief moment, the leaves seemed to murmur. David scoffed under his breath. "Here we go, village superstitions." But no one else laughed. Even the children looked uneasy, their wide eyes darting toward the edge of the forest, where the trees swayed as if listening. "Oba Anezi," Kemi spoke carefully, "why is the forest forbidden?" The chief's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Because those who enter do not return the same." A shiver crawled down Ada's spine. The chief's voice held no exaggeration, no dramatic effect, just a simple, heavy truth. The villagers nodded solemnly, then hurried to change the subject, leading the corps members to their new quarters. It was a modest clay house near the village square, with woven mats for bedding and lanterns to light the night. The air smelled of firewood and herbs, and from the distance, drums echoed through the hills, a rhythmic heartbeat of the land. Despite the simplicity, the corps members felt a strange sense of comfort. Yet, as they settled in, one thing lingered in their minds, the chief's warning. That night, as the stars blinked into existence, the wind carried a sound that made Ada's blood run cold. A whisper. From deep within the forest. Calling her name. The mystery of the Whispering Woods. The night had settled over Igboeda like a thick, heavy blanket. The lanterns flickered weakly, their glow barely cutting through the darkness. Inside their quarters, the corps members lay on their mats, exhausted from the long journey and the overwhelming welcome. But Ada couldn't sleep. The whisper she had heard from the forest still echoed in her mind, soft and insistent, not quite a voice, not quite the wind. It had spoken her name, she was sure of it. Outside, the village was unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no owls, only the rustling of leaves in the distance. The air felt thick, almost too still, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Then came the singing. It started faint, barely audible. A soft, melodic hum drifting from somewhere beyond the trees. It wasn't human. Ada shot upright, her heart hammering in her chest. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Beside her, Kemi groaned and rolled over. "Go to sleep, Ada. It's just the wind." But it wasn't just the wind. Chuka, the only guy in their group, sat up, rubbing his face. "No, she's right. I hear it too." Busy sighed. "It's probably the villagers. They had drums earlier, maybe it's part of a ceremony." Ada wasn't convinced. The sound wasn't coming from the village. It was coming from the direction of the whispering woods. David, always the skeptic, chuckled. "You guys are acting like children scared of ghost stories. It's a forest. Of course, it makes sounds." "No," Ada whispered. "Someone is singing." The room fell into silence as the core members strained their ears. The song grew louder, carrying an eerie, lilting tune that made the hairs on Ada's arms stand on end. Then, all at once, it stopped. Like a candle snuffed out. The silence was suffocating. Kemi swallowed hard. "I don't like this." Chuka forced a laugh, though his voice was strained. "Come on, guys. The chief warned us about the woods, but that doesn't mean we have to freak out over a little wind and some nighttime sounds." David smirked. "Exactly. Honestly, I think all these superstitions are just stories meant to keep the villagers in line." Busy nudged him. "Then why are you whispering?" David didn't answer. They all lay back down, but none of them truly slept. The next morning, the core members awoke to the aroma of roasted yams and palm oil stew. Villagers had already set out breakfast for them, smiling warmly as they walked past. It was almost too normal, as if the eerie events of the night before had never happened. As they ate, a small girl, Nena, appeared at the doorway, peeking in. "Good morning," Ede greeted. Nena hesitated before stepping forward, clutching a small wooden carving of a masked figure. Her eyes darted nervously toward the forest. "You heard them, didn't you?" she asked in a whisper. Eda's spoon froze midway to her mouth. "What?" "The voices," Nena said. "They always call to new people." David rolled his eyes. "Here we go. Another scary village tale." But Nena's face was grave. "You must never answer them," she warned. Ada swallowed, her throat dry. "What happens if you do?" Nena glanced over her shoulder as if afraid someone was listening. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "They take you." A cold chill ran through the room. Kemi chuckled nervously. "Okay, now you're just trying to scare us." Nena shook her head. "It's true. My brother." She hesitated, gripping the wooden carving so tightly her knuckles turned white. "My brother went into the whispering woods when I was little. He never came back." Ada felt a lump in her throat. "What did the villagers do?" Chuka asked. Nena lowered her eyes. "Nothing." Silence fell over the room. David scoffed, pushing his plate away. "All right, I've had enough of this nonsense. I need some fresh air." He stood up, stepping outside. But as he turned toward the edge of the village, his breath caught in his throat. Something was standing at the forest edge. A figure. Still. Motionless. Watching. Its body was twisted, like a person trapped in a shape they didn't belong in. Its eyes glowed dimly in the morning light. David's heart slammed against his ribs. Then, it vanished. Just like that. He blinked, his mind scrambling for logic. No, I didn't see that. It was just a shadow. Right. But when he turned back to the others, Nena was staring at him. "You saw it," she said. David forced a chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. So what? I didn't see anything. Nene didn't blink. They've noticed you now. David's stomach twisted. For the first time since arriving in Igboeda. He wasn't so sure the stories were just myths. Crossing the forbidden path. The midday sun burned high in the sky, yet the air felt cold. Not in temperature, but in presence. Like something unseen was brushing against their skin, pressing into their bones. David sat outside their quarters, his hands trembling slightly. He could still see it, the thing he had glimpsed at the edge of the whispering woods. A twisted shape, glowing eyes, a watching presence that felt more real than a shadow, yet less than a man. Nena's words played in his head. They've noticed you now. A bad joke. That's what it was. But his mind refused to let it go. Inside the hut, the others were still talking about the legend of the Whispering Woods. Chuka ran his hand down his face. Look, I don't believe in ghosts or curses, but that story about Nena's brother. It doesn't make sense. If a kid went missing, why didn't the villagers search for him? They were scared, Ada said simply. Or maybe, David cut in, stepping back inside, maybe they know something we don't. Busy groaned. Oh, great. Now you're believing the ghost stories, too. David hesitated. The thing he saw wasn't a ghost, it was something worse. We don't know what's real or not, he muttered. That's the problem. Kemi leaned back on her mat, exhaling. Well, there's one way to find out. Everyone turned to look at her. Kemi smirked, but there was something sharp in her eyes. We go into the forest. A cold silence. Then Chuka laughed. You're kidding, right? Why not, she said, stretching her arms. We're outsiders here. These people grew up hearing these stories their whole lives. Maybe they're just repeating things their grandparents told them. How do we know if there's anything to actually fear? Ada's stomach twisted. The chief said. The chief also said this was a village of rules, Kemi interrupted. What if the Whispering Woods thing is just some old law to keep outsiders away from something? What if there's something in there they don't want us to see? David's breath slowed. That thought, that made sense. Maybe the forest wasn't haunted. Maybe it was hiding something. Chuka scoffed. Okay, let's say we do this. How far do we go? Just a little past the trees, Kemi said. No deeper than a few minutes. We don't have to go all the way in. Busy chewed her lip. If we do this, we tell no one. David nodded. Agreed. And just like that, the decision was made. The edge of the Whispering Woods. The trees of the Whispering Woods loomed like silent giants. Their blackened trunks curled inward, as if shielding a terrible secret. The core members stood at the edge, staring into the shadows between the leaves, where sunlight refused to reach. Kemi inhaled sharply. All right. We go in, we take a look, we get out. That's it. Nobody moved. Then, David took the first step. The second his foot touched the forest floor, a gust of wind rushed past them, sending the trees into a frenzy of whispers. Ada flinched. The sound wasn't coming from the wind or the leaves, it was voices. Hundreds of them, murmuring words she couldn't understand, but she felt them. Felt them curling inside her skull, filling up the empty spaces in her mind. But David didn't stop. He took another step. Then another. The others followed. The air inside the forest was different. Thicker. Heavier. Like they had just stepped into another world. Busy trailed her fingers against a nearby tree. The bark was warm, as if something alive was breathing underneath. She pulled her hand away, shivering. Guys, she said slowly. Something's wrong. Kemi, who had been in the lead, stopped abruptly. I think we've seen enough. Let's turn back. They all turned. And the path was gone. The trees had shifted, closing in behind them. There was no entrance anymore. The core members froze. That, Chuka swallowed. That's impossible. Panic started creeping in. David turned in a slow circle. All right. No big deal. We just retrace our steps. Then he saw it. A figure. Not a shadow. Not a trick of the light. A man, but not a man. Standing only a few meters away. Twisted. Hollow. His head missing. The core members stared in horror as the thing moved. Not walking, gliding. Coming straight for them. Ada couldn't breathe. David took a step back. Run. The thing lurched forward. And the forest came alive. The spirits revealed themselves. The core members ran, branches whipped against their faces, tearing at their clothes as they sprinted deeper into the whispering woods. The trees shifted, their trunks twisting like ancient ribs closing in, turning the forest into a living cage. Behind them, the thing without a head did not run. It floated. Each time Ada dared to glance back, it was closer than it should be. Moving without sound, without effort, its body gliding as though it belonged to the air itself. This isn't real. David shouted, his breath ragged. But the pain in Ada's burning lungs, the sting of cuts on her arms, and the deafening heartbeat in her ears told her otherwise. This was real. And they were trapped. Then, the whispers changed. They weren't just distant voices anymore. They were inside their heads. You shouldn't have come. The forest has chosen you. One of you will not leave. Ada clutched her head, shaking violently. Stop, she screamed. Then, Chuka tripped. A single misstep, and he tumbled hard onto the forest floor, rolling into the roots of an enormous tree. Chuka! Busy cried, turning back. But before she could reach him, the roots moved. Like grasping fingers, they wrapped around Chuka's legs, twisting up his body, dragging him toward the base of the tree. He thrashed, clawing at the dirt. Help me. Ada lunged forward, grabbing his wrist, pulling with all her strength. But the tree was stronger. The bark split open, revealing a hollow, dark void, a mouth yawning wide. No, no, no. Chuka's screams turned into a gaggle choke as the tree swallowed him whole. Then, silence. The bark sewed itself shut, smooth as though nothing had ever happened. Chuka was gone. Busy let out a strangled sob. David backed away, his face pale as death. What the hell was that? Ada felt her knees weaken, the ground shifting under her. Chuka had been standing with them just moments ago. Now, he was part of the forest. They weren't just trapped. They were being taken. The forest changes. The air around them grew colder. The whispers became laughter. Soft at first, but rising, as if the entire forest was mocking them. Kemi wiped at her face, her body trembling. We have to keep moving. We have to. Then, she gasped. The trees ahead had rearranged themselves. No longer tall and stretching endlessly into the sky, now, they had bent forward, their branches twisting down into the shape of doorways. 3 paths. One path bathed in golden light. One path dark, with moving shadows. One path empty, eerily silent. Then, the voices returned. Choose. Ada swallowed hard. What do they mean, choose what? Busy backed away. No. No, no, no. I'm not walking through any of those. But the ground beneath them suddenly trembled, as if something massive was waking beneath the soil. They were out of time. David clenched his jaw. The golden one, he said. Light means safety, right? Kemi shook her head. That's too obvious. What if it's a trap? The shadows along the second path shifted, stretching toward them. The air smelled rotten, thick with the scent of something long dead. Ada could barely breathe. Every cell in her body was screaming at her to run, but there was nowhere to run. Only forward. She locked eyes with Kemi, then David. We stay together. No matter what's in there, we don't let go of each other. Agreed. They nodded. Then, with one final breath, they stepped toward the silent path. And the forest swallowed them whole. Inside the silent path. It was wrong. The second they stepped through, the forest was gone. No trees. No wind. Just an endless white space. A void stretching in all directions. The core members turned in circles, confusion and panic bubbling in their chest. There was no up, no down. Just nothing. Busy let out a sob. What is this place? David cursed under his breath, his hands balling into fists. It's another trick. Then, a voice rang out. Not whispers this time. Not laughter. A deep, hollow voice that carried weight. That carried power. You entered the forest knowing the rules. You broke the law of the land. And now you will pay the price. Ada's pulse thundered in her ears. Who are you? No answer. Just silence. Then, the ground split open beneath them. Ada screamed as she fell, the others tumbling beside her, their cries swallowed by the white abyss. Down, down, down. Until everything went black. A deal with the spirits. Falling. The sensation was endless. Not the quick, stomach-clutching drop of gravity, but a slow, pulling descent, like sinking into thick, endless water. Ada's breath choked in her throat as she tumbled through darkness, her limbs weightless, her scream swallowed by an abyss that had no walls, no sky, no floor. Then, impact. Her body slammed onto something soft but solid, knocking the wind from her lungs. For a moment, she just lay there, blinking rapidly, waiting for her senses to catch up. Around her, the others groaned, struggling to sit up. David clutched his head. Where are we? Kemi exhaled sharply, touching the ground. It wasn't soil. It wasn't wood or rock either. It felt like flesh. Guys, Busy whispered, voice trembling, we are not in the forest anymore. Ada forced herself up, her heartbeat slamming against her ribs. She looked around, and her blood ran cold. They were inside a vast chamber, stretching farther than the eye could see. The ceiling pulsed, as if it were breathing. The walls were covered in thick, twisting veins, glowing faintly. And in the center of the chamber stood something waiting for them. A throne. Made of bone. And on it, a figure sat, watching. It was neither man nor beast. Its face was smooth and blank, its skin dark as the void itself, shifting and rippling like liquid. Long, spindly fingers tapped against the throne's armrest, slow and deliberate. When it spoke, it didn't move. The voice came from all around them, inside them, beneath their skin. You should not have come. Ada's throat went dry. Kemi took a cautious step forward. Who are you? The thing tilted its head. A slow, unnatural movement. We are the forgotten. The watchers. The cursed. David swallowed hard. What do you want from us? The thing laughed, a sound that didn't belong in this world. Want. You entered our domain. You broke the sacred law. And now, you must pay the price. The floor beneath them shifted, rippling like a massive heartbeat. One of you will stay. That is the rule. Ada's breath hitched. Stay. Busy shook her head violently. No. No way. We didn't know the rule. We didn't mean to trespass. The creature stretched one long finger toward her. Ignorance does not undo a sin. A gust of wind exploded through the chamber, knocking them all backward. The walls pulsed, the veins tightening. The thing rose from its throne. You have a choice, outsiders. A deep rumbling sound echoed in the chamber. The walls split open, revealing something that made Ada's stomach drop. A pit. Dark, endless. And something was moving inside it. Something hungry. One of you would descend. The others will go free. Silence. Cold. Terror. The air felt like it had frozen over. David let out a strangled sound. You're saying we have to sacrifice someone? The creature did not blink. The law is absolute. Ada's hands curled into fists. Her mind was screaming, her heart hammering so loud she thought it might burst. They had a choice. But it wasn't a choice at all. Someone had to die. Busy stepped back. No. No, there has to be another way. There is not. Kemi's voice shook, but she stood firm. And if we refuse? The creature smiled. A wide, sickening grin. Then you all stay. David clenched his jaw, looking between the others. His face was pale, his hands shaking, but there was something else in his eyes. A decision. Slowly, he exhaled. I'll do it. Ada's head snapped toward him. What? David met her eyes, his expression calm but hollow. It's my fault we came here. I pushed for it. I said the stories weren't real. If one of us has to stay, it should be me. Busy's breath hitched. David, no. David smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We don't have time to argue. He stepped forward. And the ground opened beneath him. Ada lunged forward, but Kemi grabbed her, holding her back. David. Ada's scream tore through the chamber. David did not fall. He was pulled. Long, unseen hands reached from the abyss, dragging him down. His expression remained calm, almost resigned. As he disappeared into the pit, the walls screamed. The creature laughed. And then, everything went dark. The forest let them go. When Ada opened her eyes, she was lying in the village square. The core members gasped awake, jerking upright. They were back. Alive. But David was gone. The villagers were gathered around them, their faces somber. The chief priest stepped forward, nodding grimly. The gods have accepted your offering. Ada's chest tightened. She wanted to scream. She wanted to rage. But she couldn't. David had saved them. And the forest had taken him. Tears slid down Busy's face. Kemi covered her mouth, shaking violently. The wind howled through the trees, and for a brief moment, Ada thought she heard a whisper. David's voice. Don't come back. The forest watched them. Waiting. Knowing. And they would never forget. The village's dark secret. The sky was wrong. That was the first thing Ada noticed when she woke up. It was morning, but the sunlight felt distant, dimmed, like it was struggling to break through an invisible veil. The air smelled of damp earth, but also of something burnt, something decayed. She sat up too quickly and nausea hit her in waves. They were back. The whispering woods were behind them now, standing still and silent at the village's edge, but the forest had taken its price. David was gone. Kemi, Busy, and Ada sat in the village square, disoriented and trembling. Around them, the villagers stood in eerie silence, their faces unreadable. Some looked relieved. Others looked satisfied. Ada's pulse pounded in her ears. David was gone, and they were just supposed to go back to normal. She turned to the chief priest, her voice raw. You knew, didn't you? The old man sighed deeply, his eyes heavy with something that wasn't quite sadness. We have always known, he said simply. A hot wave of anger surged through Ada. You let us go in there. You could have stopped us. Oba Anezi, the village chief, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was a weight to it. A finality. You were warned. Kemi let out a shaky breath. But why? She demanded. Why does the forest take people? Why does it need a sacrifice? The chief priest gaze darkened. Because it is hungry, he said. A chilling silence fell over them. Long ago, the priest continued, our ancestors made a pact. The Whispering Woods was once a burial ground for warriors, men who were betrayed, slain unjustly. Their spirits remained restless, trapped between this world and the next. He gestured toward the towering trees. They became the forest. Ada's hands clenched into fists. They take the ones who trespass, the priest said. To feed their hunger. To keep the balance. If they are not given what they demand, the curse will spill into the village. Kemi shook her head. You're telling me that every year, someone has to die to keep you safe. The chief did not answer. Because he didn't have to. The truth hung thick in the air, suffocating. Busy covered her face with her hands, her whole body trembling. You should rest, the priest said gently. The forest has marked you, but you are alive. Be grateful. Grateful. Ada felt sick. David wasn't coming back. And the worst part. They weren't even surprised. The villagers had expected this. Because it had happened before. Again and again. The forest always took someone. The unspoken rule. They were given a hut near the village center, but none of them spoke for the rest of the day. Ada lay on her mat, staring at the ceiling. She felt cold all over, even under the thick blanket. Outside, the village continued as if nothing had happened. People laughed. Cooked meals. Children played in the dusty roads. As if David hadn't just been swallowed by something beyond comprehension. As if this was normal. And maybe, to them, it was. At dusk, a soft knock came at their door. Nena. The little girl stepped inside hesitantly, holding something small and wrapped in cloth. Ada sat up. Nena. The girl's eyes were round and glassy. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? Kemi asked, her voice hoarse. Nena stepped forward and placed the cloth-wrapped object into Ada's hands. It was David's NYSC name tag. A deep shuddering breath ripped through Ada's chest. He left it behind, Nena said. I don't know how it got out. Ada's grip tightened on the cloth. The weight of it was unbearable. She looked at the girl. How many? Nena frowned. What? How many have you seen disappear into the woods? Ada whispered. The little girl's hands twisted in her dress. She hesitated. Then, too softly, she said. I stopped counting. Ada's breath hitched. Kemi looked away, her shoulders shaking. Busy pressed a hand to her mouth. This wasn't a one-time thing. The Whispering Woods had been eating people for generations. The core members weren't the first. And they wouldn't be the last. The price of living. That night, they made their decision. They couldn't stay. Not in a village that had willingly sent them to die. Not in a place that had let David go without a second thought. At dawn, they went to the chief priest. We want to leave, Ada said, standing tall despite the tightness in her chest. The priest nodded, as if he had been expecting this. You may go, he said. Relief flooded through Ada's body. But then, the priest's next words knocked the air out of her. But you may never speak of this place. Silence. If you tell others what happened here, the priest said, the forest will find you. No matter where you are. Busy paled. Kemi let out a sharp breath. Your saying will be cursed. The priest's expression was unreadable. You will be haunted. A chill swept through the room. Ada swallowed. And if we promise to stay silent? The priest finally smiled. Then you will live. The final journey. The villagers gathered at the outskirts the next morning. It felt like a funeral. Women offered them silent blessings, pressing warm hands to their foreheads. The elders watched them without expression. And the whispering woods stood behind them all. Still. Waiting. They didn't look back. They just walked. The journey out of Igboeda took 3 days. And when they finally saw a paved road, the shock of civilization felt alien. They returned to the city. They went home. They tried to live normal lives. But the forest never left them. At night, Ada would wake up with dirt in her sheets. Kemi started hearing whispers in her shower. Busy would find David's name tag moved, always appearing in places she hadn't left it. And then, one day, Kemi vanished. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Just gone. Like the forest had finally come to collect. Ada tried to run. She moved to a different country, changed her name. It didn't matter. The night before her disappearance, she wrote one last entry in her journal. It read, I hear them calling me. I shouldn't have spoken his name. The whispering woods never forget. The next morning, her apartment was empty. The only thing left behind. A single root growing from the floor. And the faint echo of David's voice. Don't come back. The whispering woods never forget. Ada was gone. Her apartment was untouched, no signs of struggle, no forced entry, no open windows. Yet her bed was still warm when they found it, the sheets slightly rumpled, as if she had just been lying there moments ago. But there was no Ada. The only clue left behind was a single root, thick and black, curling up from the wooden floorboards like a finger pointing at nothing. And the air smelled like damp earth. Busy stood in the doorway, her breath coming in shallow, broken gasps. She knew. She had always known. Ever since they left Igboeda, ever since David was swallowed whole, ever since Kemi vanished without a trace, this had been coming. They had broken the rule. They had spoken of the forest. And now, it was collecting the debt. The last one left. Busy was the only one left. She locked herself inside her apartment for weeks. No TV. No phone. No lights at night. She refused to sleep. Because every time she closed her eyes, she would see it, the forest. The trees were closer now. The shadows moved faster. And she could hear them. Whispers sliding through the walls. Come back. We are waiting. You were never meant to leave. The more she ignored them, the louder they got. Her reflection in the mirror started changing. At first, it was subtle. A shift in posture. A delay in movement. Then, one night, she caught it smiling when she wasn't. That was the night she packed her bags. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to run. But when she opened the door, it was there. Not the city. Not the street. The whispering woods. Tall. Dark. Waiting. Her apartment was gone. There was no escape. Busy's body went cold. Her knees buckled. She turned, only to find David standing behind her. Not David. What was left of him? His NYSC uniform was torn and rotten, his skin the color of ash. And his eyes, they weren't his anymore. They were black holes. Empty. Hollow. Hungry. Busy, he whispered, his voice not quite human. You should have never left. The forest takes its due. Busy's scream never left her throat. The ground opened beneath her feet, pulling her into the black earth. The trees closed in, their branches wrapping around her like reaching arms. The whispers turned to laughter. Low. Dark. Endless. The forest had waited patiently. And now, it had taken them all. 1 year later. The next batch of NYSC corps members arrived in Igboeda. 5 new faces, fresh and curious, stepping out of a rickety bus onto the dusty village road. The villagers smiled. They were welcomed with warm hands, fresh food, soft beds. And then, as always, the chief gave them the warning. You are welcome here, but you must obey our rules. There is only one. Do not enter the Whispering Woods. The corps members exchanged amused glances. And somewhere in the depth of the forest, unseen by mortal eyes, Ada, Kemi, Busy, and David watched. Waiting. Because the forest never forgets. And neither do the ones it keeps.